Picture the ancient past. The men stride off into the tall grass, spears in hand, to bring down a mammoth. The women stay behind at camp, gathering berries, minding the babies, keeping the fire alive. It is the single most famous image of prehistory. Man the hunter, woman the gatherer. It's in every textbook, every museum diorama, every cartoon caveman gag. There is just one small problem. A growing pile of evidence says that image might be badly, fundamentally wrong. Because in 2020, archaeologists opened a 9,000-year-old grave high in the Andes and found a big game hunter buried with a full set of weapons. And that hunter was a woman. So did ancient women actually hunt? The honest answer is more surprising and more hotly argued than you might think, and it is quietly rewriting the story of who all of us really were. Let's dig in. First, where did man the hunter even come from? Not from the Stone Age, from us. In 1968, a famous conference and a book, literally titled Man the Hunter, locked in a powerful idea that hunting big game, treated as a male job, was the engine that drove human evolution. Men hunted, men brought home the meat, and that, supposedly, is what made us smart, social, and human. It was a tidy story. It fit the mood of the times. And it quietly soaked into everything: the paintings in museums, the diagrams in school books, the club-dragging caveman in every cartoon. But here's the sneaky part. Once you simply assume that men were the hunters, you start seeing it everywhere, even where it isn't. For decades, whenever archaeologists dug up a skeleton buried with hunting weapons, they made an automatic assumption: this must be a man. Spear equals male. It felt so obvious that nobody bothered to check. And that one lazy little assumption may have hidden the truth in plain sight for a century. Because bones don't come with a label, an old damaged skeleton can be genuinely hard to sex just by looking at it. But we now have tools the old archaeologists never had. We can read tiny proteins locked inside tooth enamel that reveal, with real confidence, whether a person was biologically female or male. And when scientists finally started actually checking, instead of just assuming, some of those great hunters, buried proudly with their weapons, turned out to be women. Turns out spear equals male was never really a scientific finding. It was just a very, very confident guess. And in science, a confident guess dressed up as a fact can outlive the truth for generations. The case that cracked the whole thing open came in 2020 from a site called Wilamaya Patjxa, high in the Peruvian Andes. There, the archaeologist Haas and his team uncovered a 9,000-year-old burial. And lying beside the body was not a single spear, but a hunter's entire toolkit. Projectile points for tipping weapons, sharp blades, scrapers, tools for taking a large animal all the way from the kill to the hide. Around 24 carefully made stone tools, deliberately placed with the body. This was not someone who happened to own one weapon. This was someone equipped and honored as a serious big game hunter. You do not send someone into the next life loaded with hunting gear for a job they never did. And when the team analyzed the bones and the proteins in the teeth, that hunter turned out to be a young woman, likely just 17 to 19 years old. Now, one grave could always be a fluke, a strange exception. Haas knew that perfectly well. So his team did the careful thing. They went back through the records of other ancient burials all across North and South America. They found 27 individuals who had been buried with big game hunting tools, and of those 27, 11 were female. 11 out of 27. That is not a freak exception you can wave away. That is a pattern. It led the researchers to a genuinely startling estimate that somewhere between 30 and 50% of the big game hunters in the early Americas may have been women. Sit with that number, not zero, potentially up to half. The tidy scene of the all-male hunting party, painted in 1,000 museum halls, suddenly had women standing right in the middle of it, spears in hand. These were not helpers tagging along. They were the ones the group trusted to make the kill. So was it like that everywhere, all over the world? Here is where we have to be honest with you, because this is exactly where scientists start arguing, loudly. In 2023, another team, led by Abigail Anderson, went even bigger. They surveyed 63 hunter-gatherer societies documented over the last century, from every corner of the planet, and they reported that women hunted in 79% of them, and that most of that hunting was deliberate. Women setting out to hunt on purpose, not just grabbing an animal that happened to wander past. That headline flew around the world. Man the hunter is dead. But, and this really matters, other researchers pushed back, hard. They argued the study's methods were too loose, that it counted cases too generously, and that when you look carefully, a real division of labor still shows up in most societies, with men, on average, still doing more of the big game hunting. So who is right? Probably somewhere in between, and that is completely fine. Because here is the thing both sides actually agree on. The old rigid idea that women never hunted, that it was strictly men only, is simply false. Women hunted. Sometimes small game, sometimes big, sometimes constantly, sometimes rarely. But that wall was never as solid as the textbooks drew it. And physically, there was never a barrier in the first place. Some researchers argue that women's bodies are actually well-tuned for the exact kind of effort hunting demands. Steady, fat-burning stamina for a long, patient chase. Remember persistence hunting, running an animal down over hours until it drops from exhaustion? That is not a contest of brute strength. It is a contest of endurance. And there, the gap between men and women shrinks to almost nothing. The point was never that women were secretly the real hunters all along. The point is that survival never handed out jobs by gender. It handed them out by who was skilled, who was available, and who was willing to bring food home. In a world that was always one bad week from starvation, nobody could afford to bench half the camp. So, did ancient women hunt? Yes. The evidence on a grave in the Andes, weapons in the ground, and the bodies of the hunters themselves says it plainly. How often and how equally is still being argued, and honestly it should be. That is just science doing its job. But the neat, comfortable story we were handed, men with spears, women with baskets, a clean line drawn straight down the middle of the human race, was never really theirs. It was ours. We drew that line thousands of years later and painted it back onto a past that never asked for it. The real ancient world was messier and far more interesting, a place where survival was a team sport, and the only question that truly mattered around the fire was not who you were, but what you could do. Skill put meat on the fire, a job title never did. So the next time you see that classic caveman scene, the men off hunting, the women left behind, picture the young woman from Wilamaya Patjxa, 9,000 years ago, laid to rest with honor beside her spears, and remember this, the past is almost always braver and stranger than the tidy little story we tell about it. This is Sketchient. Subscribe and stay curious about where we came from.